If $1 billion in missiles vanished at 4:22 a.m., how would you know it happened? Tonight we trace a freighter that thought a Russian flag and darkness made it invisible, and how it was erased without a shot broadcast on the news. You'll see how 14 sensors on USS Abraham Lincoln built a dossier so detailed it recorded a crewman's vodka theft. Then how a P-8 Poseidon's thermal map matched Iranian manifests container by container. Stay to watch the 90-second blackout, the SEAL's 40-second bridge takedown, and the strikes that dismantled an entire supply chain in one night. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. A Russian flag on the stern, the AIS, flickers at first light, and a crew that swore the Arabian Sea would swallow their trail. So why did every mile feel watched? Kapitan Vulov didn't look like a pirate king. On paper, he was a gray merchant captain with a tidy file. The route wasn't tidy. Origin markers showed a Moscow area consolidation, a rail-to-river handoff, then a Black Sea hop that made too many fuel stops for a standard run. The destination line read Gulf of Oman. The ship wore a Russian flag like armor, the kind that makes small patrols think twice. It sailed with the swagger of a vessel that expected glances to slide off. Its AIS told a clean story at a glance. Lanes respected, speed steady, overtakes legal. Look closer, and the ship drifted a hair right of track in dawn currents, then corrected too sharply. Fuel logs, inferred from tank-level updates and port sales, showed burn rates 10% heavy for that speed and sea state. Twice, in shipping lanes where transponders stay lit, the ship winked out. Back on, it claimed a position that fit the lane, but not the time it had been dark. Those little gaps looked like convenience, not accident. The mask had layers. The call sign history jumped between registries across 3 years, with gaps that aligned with sanctions pushes. Ownership traced to a shell on top of a shell, with directors who also sat on fertilizer firms and consultancies that never posted profits. 2 weeks before departure, an insurance rider appeared, adding special cargo contingencies and a piracy clause update, both priced like the underwriter smelled heat. Paperwork wanted to be noticed and not understood. Maritime analysts don't stare at AIS alone. They pair transponder points with synthetic aperture radar passes from satellites that don't care about clouds or darkness. If the AIS dot says the ship is here, and the SAR strip shows a wake somewhere else, you've got spoofing. Wakes tell tales. Thickness and turbulence patterns hint at weight in the hull. A deeper, fuller signature at a given speed means more displacement than the manifest admits. When the angles line up across multiple passes, the math stops being a guess. There are cases where the numbers didn't fit and the cargo did the confessing. A westbound feeder once listed mixed pallets and appliances. Its roll period slowed and its bow rode heavy. Scan crews later found dense tubes lashed low, far beyond declared tonnage. Another time, a coastal hauler reported grain. Thermal checks and draft telltales said metal. The hold opened to rows of sealed cylinders, all agri-equipment, all too long by law. Far over the horizon, the Lincoln Group tracked like a long shadow. No flashing lights, no fast closure, just quiet updates flowing into a model that scores behavior against known smuggling playbooks. Route oddities, comms quirks, fuel curves, maintenance pauses that match handoffs. Every odd minute pushed the score up. Day 4, the needle crossed action. You could call it a hunch with spreadsheets. What did the numbers hint at? Mass that ran long and tight like missile canisters. Crates with shielding where you'd expect cardboard. Power draw patterns that fit EW racks. And drone support gear. Enough to move a war hidden under consumer goods. If paper smelled like smoke, the next step was heat, not hope. The sensor stack was waiting. How can one ship be under 14 sets of eyes at once and still get caught arguing over a missing bottle of vodka? That's the trick. The carrier group built a file so intimate it felt like standing on the bridge, and it started with a net that never slept. Out ahead, the E-2 orbited and stitched the sky together. Its radar cast a wide dome, pushing clean tracks to the Lincoln's core. Around the carrier, escorts with SPY series arrays swept the surface and pinned the freighter's lane with narrow beams that read speed changes like a pulse. Below that layer, SIGINT suites hoovered up sat phone handshakes, cheap walkie bursts, and stray modem tones bouncing off the water. ELINT receivers listened for radar and nav aids, filing away anything that didn't fit civilian habits. Passive EO and IR eyes, mounted on helos, drones, and shipboard masts, stared long enough to learn the deck like a neighborhood. Each piece alone was noise. Together, the shape of a day emerged. The flood came fast. Surface plots, RF spikes, engine harmonics with a wobble that hinted at a bearing going dry, thermal strings that rose and fell like someone was cycling power below. None of it mattered until the curves lined up. Analysts checked where the radar said the ship turned, whether the radios quieted at the same time, and if the heat on deck shifted when the watches changed. If the picture snapped into place, the light moved from amber to green. Fusion did the heavy lifting. SATCOM pings showed which birds the ship hit and from what angles, giving rough geolocation even without content. Long glass optics watched deckhands move crates and rig tarps, then flagged when routines broke under stress. Down in the acoustic lane, microphones riding the escorts compared the prop's beat and blade count to a library, then matched shaft vibration to a specific hull. When the screw note drifted a hair at the same time the AIS blipped, and the radars saw a speed sag, the timeline tightened. They stalked under MCON, cutting their own chatter and using low probability of intercept modes, so the freighter's receivers heard the ocean and nothing else. Sweep rates slowed, power dropped, waveforms hugged the noise floor. It's how you walk behind a man on carpet. He doesn't feel the breath on his neck. Here's where it bent human. Routine sat phone chatter dipped after a route tweak, then spiked when someone walked the captain through a correction. A maintenance note, sent on a cheap channel, mentioned a liquor locker recce after a petty theft. The rhythm on deck changed that night. Fewer smokes at the rail, an extra hand on the midwatch. You don't need a confession when the mood sours on schedule. Those small leaks sealed the model. The crew snapped at each other during course holds. Watch bills stretched. A man lingered by the comms rack longer than his shift card allowed. Down below, cargo bay temperature checks. Read-off vents by IR held steady where perishables should have swung with ambient air. How did the vodka story land in the file? An intercepted work order flagged the lock change, and Longlens EO pulled a few frames through a porthole. A crewman swapping the hasp, another guarding the door. That level of detail said they weren't guessing. With life aboard mapped, only a clean view of the cargo's bones stood between watching and moving. If you can't open a container at sea, how do you still read it? You read its heat. High above the lane, a P-8 Poseidon settled into a cold orbit. It swept the freighter with its NPY-10 radar, then held a steady look through the MX-20HDEO/IR turret. The radar framed the ship in clean lines, box shapes, gaps, and stacks, while the EO/IR tracked temperature shifts down to small fractions. Together, they built a map that showed not just where metal sat, but how it behaved under load and time. The manifest waved a hand at random goods. Tools, textiles, and electronics spread across mixed pallets. The thermal pass said something else. Container rows showed a repeating pattern of insulated shells, each holding a tight core cooler than the skin. Several units bled steady heat at control panel height, a sign of powered racks. The line of variants ran smooth, like a system under regulation, not a jumble of retail freight. A few blocks stayed warmer longer after sundown, hinting at solid fuel storage, cooling at a slower rate. Infrared gradients tell on weight and material. Heavy steel canisters don't heat or cool like cardboard cartons. Their cores lag, their skins drop, and the curve between them bends in a known way. The radar return, tuned for surface mapping, traced the true edges of each container and the tie-down rails across the deck. Stacking patterns popped, 3x3 banks with uniform spacing, the kind you use when weight and center of mass must stay fixed. Faint heat plumes puffed from small vents near the superstructure, right where portable power feeds would sit if you ran EW crates needing clean current. Thermal inertia sealed it. Steel tubes carry heat longer and let it out in straight lines along their length. Mixed pallets don't. Their patchwork warms and cools in blotches. Dense propellant casings, packed tight, shed heat in slow, predictable slopes, and any active conditioning leaves a quiet halo. On the P-8's screen, those halos lined up row after row. You couldn't read serials, but you could read the physics. This wasn't a first. In prior interdictions, IR mapping flagged missile tubes by the same length to diameter spread and the even gaps between lash points. Long-run imaging caught the shape of tie-down shadows under sun, then watched those shadows carry residual warmth into night in straight bars. That quirk doesn't show up on mixed freight. It does on tubes that must not budge. Back on the console, analysts overlaid each container block with a library of known layouts pulled from leaks tied to a Moscow area supplier network. One by one, the shapes clicked. The banks that ran cool and slow matched sealed canisters in standard lengths. The powered bays landed where high-gain arrays and control racks would sit. The warm, wide crates aligned with airframe shells and folded wing assemblies. What was hidden sat in plain numbers. Ballistic missile sections, stacked nose to fin, EW racks with high-gain antenna modules and clean power conditioners, crated drones with folding wings, sized for long range and quiet launch. With the cargo read and labeled, the loop closed. This wasn't a gray ship anymore. It was an index of banned systems moving under cover. And with the ID fixed, the timeline flipped from patient to precise. The next move came without a word. What does it feel like when a ship loses the sky, the clock, and its own name in 90 seconds? It starts with a sound you don't hear, just a tight hiss at the edges of every radio. Then numbers slip. Time stamps stumble. The bridge crew stare at screens that no longer agree with each other, and the ocean around them seems to stop answering back. Two EA-18G growlers slide into their lanes and start cutting threads, SATCOM first. The high links choke as spot beams lock onto the freighter's known terminals. HF and UHF go next, not with a sledgehammer, but with thin needles that sit on the same channels the crew think are clean. GPS timing, the heartbeat for everything from the bridge clock to the engine control sync, gets salted with lies. In parallel, quiet cyber tools push at the nav stack, nudging software that drives the ECDIS and the autopilot, prodding at update files and backup configs the crew never read. The bridge reaches for backups, like you'd reach for a falling glass. Alternate SAT terminals fire, then fail. The HF whip sings as the watch officer dials through nets, but the return never settles. UHF handsets sound fine until they don't. Screens keep drawing tracks, yet the vectors drift by fractions that become whole degrees. The ECDIS shows the ship on its lane, while a plotting board pencil starts to disagree. GPS claims a steady fix, but the inertial set under the deck says the nose is sliding. Someone taps the case, because that's what you do when you can't admit the world moved. Tactics matter here. Spot jamming hits a single channel and leaves neighbors alone, so the bridge blames a bad antenna instead of a hostile hand. Barrage jamming is for later. For now, the sky stays mostly quiet. Deceptive GPS overlays feed the receivers believable numbers. Same satellites, wrong solution. Selective denial drops just enough packets that systems throw soft faults, the kind engineers label intermittent. It looks like a Tuesday problem, not an act. Ships trust timing because timing ties the whole stack together. Corrupt position, navigation, and timing, and you break more than a dot on a map. The gyro starts to bias. Autopilot inputs chase ghosts and add tiny rudder kicks that build into a snake. Engine governors drift out of sync and hunt for a rhythm that isn't there. Dead reckoning falls back on speed logs that are now lying because their own references wobble. So the next fix is built on sand. This isn't theory. EW teams in controlled exercises have walked compliant vessels miles off their reported positions without a single alarm tone. They did it by feeding gentle errors and letting the ship's own filters smooth the lie into something the crew wanted to see. That's the trap. Belief. 90 seconds in, the freighter can't raise a soul. Coordinates can't be trusted. Lookouts wave at the dark and get nothing back. The ship feels like it slipped behind a curtain. And because it reads as distress, not a duel, everyone stays calm. No flares, no frantic broad calls. The The legal risk drops while the access window opens. Isolated, the sea narrows to a hallway. Short, dark, controlled. The next footstep belongs to 8 men riding the chop at wave-top height. Can 8 operators rewrite a ship's fate between 2 waves and a single minute on the clock? They try when the deck is deaf, the bridge is blind, and the chop hides more than sound. The blackout holds. The helm crew stare at dead channels that look sick, not jammed. That's the opening. The clock is cruel now, and every second is a choice. 2 MH-60N Nighthawks creep in low, with their lights cold and their profiles tucked under the wind. They ride the sea state, using the stern spray as a veil. Fast ropes hang ready. The lead bird drifts over the wake, where the rotor wash blends with whitewater. The second offsets to port to split attention. Doors slide, lines fall, and boots meet steel in a stack that breathes like one body. The helos hold just high enough to keep the blades out of the rail. Noise is the enemy and the cover. Engines thrum, but the bridge can't decide if it's wind or metal. Rotor wash rattles vents and masks footfalls. A blind bridge can still panic. If a hand finds a working handset, a single mayday could bring eyes. Radios might snap back at any time, so they move before a nervous watchman decides to shout down a deadline. The breach runs in layers, not bangs. Ladders hook at the stern quarter and midships. A jammer brick kisses the nearest camera hub and feeds it a loop. Dome eyes blink dumb. Internal comm nodes get a soft kill. Power clipped, lines bridged, and intercoms die without a pop. 3 entry teams peel off. Bridge wing, aft door, and a ladder to the chart room. Door wedges go in, hinges get taped, and the first voices the crew hear are quiet and final. Non-lethal dominance on the bridge isn't charity. It keeps the intel clean and the paperwork short. A live crew answers questions about routes, passwords, and cargo access. No shots avoids a flag state spiral and a courtroom full of lawyers. It also preserves hardware in place, from nav logs to hard drives, which is worth more than bravado. Past boardings proved the point. Teams that seized helm, throttle, and radio stacks in the first sweep stopped scuttling, and SOS bursts. One twist of the telegraph and a wheel brake pinned, and a captain's last throw, flood the bilge or slam the call, died on contact. Those seconds shape the whole night. Men down, wrists cinched, and the captain separated. He gets a chair, a headset off, and a calm voice in his ear. Logs disappear into bags. Drives drop into Faraday pouches. The engineering lead walks the ladder wells and counts watertight doors. Demo charges sit where they hurt slow. Frames, conduit trunks, and vents that feed the lower compartments. Timers tick so water arrives after everyone leaves and well past recovery depth. It runs to time, about 40 seconds per operator to dominate the bridge, strip control, and lock the space. No flares, no screams offshore. Just a ship that now answers to a hand it can't see. The timers are set, water finds seams. Bulkheads weep, then yield. This hull isn't going to appear, while the deck goes quiet and the wake softens. Far ashore, the supply chain starts losing its hands and feet. Deterrence speaks in quiet math. Intelligence stacks, precision lands, and $1 billion shipment becomes a blank line while the network that fed it limps. You don't need speeches when ports go still and escorts miss their cue. The cost ledger whispers, the map updates, and the lanes stay clean because they remember. If this is what you can see from the outside, what operations never need to be told? What files stay sealed because the message already traveled? Subscribe for more deep breakdowns.